vis-a-vis our alliance structure in the Gulf and our basing structure in the Gulf. We had all these bases that looked like they provided significant capability for projecting power against Iran. And we had close relations with all 6 of the Gulf states. It looked like we had a quite formidable alliance in place. That was on the 27th. And I don't think many people anticipated what would happen to that alliance structure and to that basing structure once the war started. But in fact, what happened is that virtually all the bases were either badly damaged or destroyed. And we proved very clearly that we could not provide security for the Gulf states, that our security umbrella was inadequate. This is unequivocally clear. And the question is, where do we go moving forward? And it's hard to believe that the Gulf states are going to rely in any meaningful way on the United States to provide security for them. They're going to have to choose an alternative path moving forward.
Isn't the memorandum of understanding signed by President Trump and Pezeshkian essentially a U.S. capitulation?
Yeah, there's no question about that. Basically, the memorandum of understanding that was signed on June 17th reflects the coercive balance of power at the time. And there is no question that by June 17th, the coercive balance of power decisively favored the Iranians over the United States, which is why Trump signed this deal, which was basically a surrender document. Anybody who's looked at all of the points, the 14 points in the document, understands clearly that the Iranians have won on virtually every issue. And the reason this is the case is because we lost the war.
Here's, of all people, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor to President Biden for the 4 years that President Biden was in the White House, basically saying the Iranians outsmarted Trump's real estate agents. Cut number 3.
If you just look at how they work the wording of the agreements they do, they are highly detail oriented, not just because they're lawyerly, but because they want to extract benefits from those details. Just one example from the MOU. The provision that says the U.S. would waive sanctions refers to oil, and then there's this little clause that says, and derivatives. What are derivatives? The petrochemical sector. That is the second largest sector in Iran. Now, do I think the U.S. really even understood what it was signing with that? Maybe not. But Iran knew it would get billions and billions of dollars just by inserting that word. And that's why you bring a very large delegation, because you're looking for every advantage in this highly complex, detailed negotiation. And I think as long as they're bringing that expertise and we're only bringing a couple guys, it will be advantage Iran.
They're bringing expertise, he's being charitable, and we're bringing 2 New York City real estate agents.
I actually think this is all nonsense. I think that basically he's arguing that we were fleeced, that it was inexperience that produced this document, this surrender document. It wasn't the fact that we were fleeced. It reflected the balance of coercive power. Look, those documents that were floated around before we reached an agreement on the final memorandum of understanding on June 17th.
And the final is almost the same as the initial that they proposed.
Yes, it is. But, you know, we proposed a counter document, right? There were a number of documents floating around. There were endless negotiations on these documents. I find it hard to believe that we didn't look over every word. And the reason that we had to swallow all of these provisions that were to Iran's advantage and our disadvantage was because the balance of coercive power decisively favored the Iranians.
So how did Iran defeat the United States and Israel? How do you make sense out of Iran's military victory?
Well, first of all, it had the military capability to shut down the strait and, in effect, threaten to take the international economy off a cliff. President Trump likes to talk about how he destroyed the Iranian Navy and the Iranian Air Force. He may have destroyed a big chunk of each of those institutions, but the fact is that the Iranians were left with enough military power that they could shut the strait and keep the strait shut down. So that's the first major point. The second point is they have a significant missile capability, mainly ballistic missiles, but also cruise missiles, as well as drones. And they have the ability to do enormous damage to our bases in the region and to the infrastructure in the 6 Gulf states. In addition, they have the ability to pound Israel with those ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. So if you get into a shooting match with them, which we did, we could only go 40 days and we had to quit. It is very important to understand that. We quit after 40 days without a victory. This is the air war, because we were running out of precious munitions. And furthermore, we were running out of targets to hit. We had hit so many targets. The fact is that the Iranians could absorb an enormous amount of punishment.
Now,
we didn't find ourselves in a position where we could dish out more punishment because, again, we were running out of munitions. This is what I say when the balance of course of power favored the Iranians. This is what happened.
here's why I think Trump will dismiss Hegseth. Why didn't the Pentagon plan for that? Why didn't they warn Trump about it? How could they not have foreseen these events? Did they fall? Did the Pentagon fall as Trump fell, hook, line, and sinker for what Mossad and Netanyahu said to Trump?
Well, I distinguish between Hegseth and General Kane, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And my memory tells me very clearly that before February 28th, when we were talking about attacking Iran, General Kane made it clear that we had a serious problem in terms of the amount of munitions that we had for a war against Iran. So I think that Kane was not enthusiastic at all about this war. All the evidence is that Hegseth was. So I think that there were voices in the Pentagon, for sure, who said that this was not a good idea. And you want to remember from that famous New York Times article that detailed what the negotiating process between the Israelis and the Americans looked like in the run-up to the war. It seems clear from that article that almost all of Trump's advisors, except for Hegseth, thought that going to war against Iran the way we did on February 28th was not going to work out. It appears that it was Netanyahu and David Barnea, who was the head of Mossad, plus Hegseth, who were the real hawks here and played the key role in convincing Trump that this was a good idea.
How about the Gulf states? Aren't they reevaluating their relationship to the United States? We couldn't protect them from Iran, and most of our bases in their countries have been destroyed.
Exactly. I mean, what kind of security umbrella does the United States provide for these countries? It's quite remarkable, Judge, if you think about the situation on February 27th, vis-a-vis our alliance structure in the Gulf and our basing structure in the Gulf. We had all these bases that looked like they provided significant capability for projecting power against Iran. And we had close relations with all 6 of the Gulf states. It looked like we had a quite formidable alliance in place. That was on the 27th. And I don't think many people anticipated what would happen to that alliance structure and to that basing structure once the war started. But in fact, what happened is that virtually all the bases were either badly damaged or destroyed. And we proved very clearly that we could not provide security for the Gulf states, that our security umbrella was inadequate. This is unequivocally clear. And the question is, where do we go moving forward? And it's hard to believe that the Gulf states are going to rely in any meaningful way on the United States to provide security for them. They're going to have to choose an alternative path moving forward.
Here's Jake Sullivan again, and this time I think you'll agree with him. Cut number 4.
I think that they are now questioning the basic model upon which they've built their security, which has been essentially a deep partnership, security partnership with the United States, including forward deployed American bases in their countries. I think now they're asking themselves, what are we getting for that? And do we need basically a more diversified approach that involves a degree of hedging with other powers, maybe including China, and definitely includes quiet diplomacy with Iran to try to make sure that they're de-escalating with their neighbor across the strait?
Hard to disagree. I mean, I think I think he's rarely right, but this is a case where he is correct. That I think the Gulf states have a vested interest in developing a more diversified foreign policy for the reasons we talked about before.
What is Netanyahu doing to draw the United States back into war?
Well, he's not doing much to draw us back into war because we are not going back into war. I mean, what are we talking about here? Restarting the bombing campaign? As I said to you before, that is a non-starter. It's not going to happen. We're not going to restart the bombing campaign, in my opinion. It would be lunacy, right? Where Netanyahu is causing us trouble is by his behavior in Lebanon. What the Iranians want to make this deal between us and them work is for Israel to get out of southern Lebanon and stop bombing South Beirut. It appears that the Israelis have stopped bombing South Beirut for the time being, but they're not getting out of southern Lebanon. And this is a real problem in terms of U.S.-Iranian relations. So I think what Netanyahu is doing here, he's not dragging us back into the war. What he's doing is he's complicating our efforts to put the memorandum of understanding on a firmer footing.
Here he is 2 days ago. Listen to the very end of what he says about from the river to the sea.
Much more. I think there are many principles. I'll give you another example. Another principle of the government I intend, the broad national government I intend to lead. There is no place for two states. What? From the sea to the Jordan, there is no room for two states.
From the sea to the Jordan, there is no room for two states. In his own mind, the Greater Israel Project is going well?
I think he's sophisticated enough to know the Greater Israel Project is not going well. He surely understands he's lost in Iran. He's in deep trouble in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah is inflicting significant casualties on the IDF. The IDF is basically worn out. Despite what has happened in Gaza regarding the genocide, the fact is that Hamas is still intact and it's still a formidable fighting force. So the idea that Israel has accomplished great goals and Greater Israel is looking like it's working out swimmingly is an argument that's almost impossible to make these days. And I think that Netanyahu understands this. But the question is, what does he then do when he sees himself and his country in trouble? And the answer is he doubles down. And this is why when you think about Israel moving forward, it's going to be just more war, more horror, more genocide. They really have no choice if they want to continue to pursue this goal of a greater Israel.
Wow. Professor Mearsheimer, thank you very much, my dear friend.